I spent 27 years believing my parents died in a freak electrical fire. It left me with nothing but third-degree scars on my palms and a blank foster care file. But last night, a billionaire grabbed my wrist at a high-end gala. He stared into my soul, and he whispered 5 words that turned my entire life into a lie. I watched you get those. I stood there, right in the center of his massive, air-conditioned ballroom. I was surrounded by people who wore watches worth more than I'd earn in 10 lifetimes. My cheap catering shoes were planted in a sea of shattered antique porcelain, and a splash of vintage champagne was currently soaking into my white uniform. It was turning it a translucent, pathetic yellow. Honestly, I was supposed to be a ghost that night. Just another body hired to scrub glasses, haul silver trays, and collect my $50 an hour before retreating to my cramped one-bedroom apartment in Columbus. Instead, I was locked in a staring contest with a man who looked like he'd just seen a spirit rise from the marble floor. And maybe he had. Because according to the reality, this man began to unravel right there under the crystal chandeliers. I had been dead for 27 years. My name is Declan Morse, at least. That's the identity I've worn like a secondhand coat since the 90s. That's the name on my driver's license, my social security card, the plastic employee badge I clip to my shirt every morning at Granger Furniture Distribution. It's the name Pauline gave me when she pulled a terrified 7-year-old out of the foster system. I was a kid with no memories, and hands that looked like they'd been dipped in molten wax. But as I stood in the middle of the Ashby estate, the air smelling of expensive lilies and high-end gin, I realized Declan Morse was a fiction. These scars, they weren't a random tragedy. They weren't some freak accident from a life I couldn't recall. They were physical evidence of a night that had incinerated my actual history. Theron Ashby isn't the kind of billionaire you see posting cringe on social media. He's the quiet type. He built Ashby Industrial Holdings into a titan, then vanished behind the stone walls of this estate. He only opens the gates once a year for his inner circle. No press, no cameras, just the ultra-wealthy sipping $500 wine and pretending the working class doesn't exist. I was only there to ensure their glasses stayed sparkling. I was saving every cent for HVAC certification because I wanted a real trade, something that didn't involve destroying my spine on a loading dock. I never expected to walk out of that mansion with a father. Anyway, as I walked toward Theron's private study, I saw a man in the shadows near the corridor. He looked exactly like the one from my nightmares, and he wasn't smiling. He was whispering into a radio. His eyes were tracking me with a predatory stillness, the kind that makes the sweat on your neck turn to ice. But to understand why a billionaire's security team suddenly looked like they wanted me dead, I have to tell you about the life I was living just 24 hours earlier. The morning before my world imploded, I woke up at 5:30, like a machine. My apartment was freezing. I kept the thermostat at exactly 62 degrees because Ohio winters are expensive, and I was a master at being cheap. I stood over the cracked linoleum in my kitchen, eating generic cereal and drinking instant coffee that tasted like burnt dirt. My 12-year-old Honda Civic was waiting in the parking lot. It smelled like old upholstery and desperation. I drove to Granger, the same drive I'd made every day since I was 23. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I spent my days supervising 8 guys on the loading dock. We moved heavy oak bed frames and sectional sofas. The work was brutal on the lower back, but there was an honesty to it. You start with a hollow steel trailer, you fill it to the brim, and you watch it pull away. No politics, no fake smiles, just the steady rhythm of labor. At the end of the shift, I could look at the empty dock and know exactly what I'd accomplished. My coworkers knew me as the quiet guy, the guy who showed up 5 minutes early, did the heavy lifting, and kept his personal business under lock and key. Most of those guys had lives that made sense. Wives, kids, mortgages. I had a savings account and a plan to get certified so I could stop hauling furniture before my knees gave out. Growing up in the system, you learn fast. No one is coming to save you. There's no safety net made of silk, only the one you weave yourself with grit and overtime. I didn't have an inheritance. I didn't have a family business. I was a man who had made a quiet, lonely peace with his limitations. I knew exactly where I came from, a fire station and a blank file. The only person who actually gave a damn about me was Pauline Decker. She fostered me from age 7 until I aged out, and she stayed in my corner even after the state check stopped. Pauline was a retired cafeteria lady with sharp brown eyes. Her house always smelled like cinnamon and old books. She had fostered 30 kids, but she always told me I was the one who stuck. One Sunday, about a month before the party, the curiosity I'd tried to kill started twitching. I watched the steam rise from my coffee and asked her if she ever wondered about my real parents. Pauline didn't flinch. She just looked at me with that gaze that always felt like it was reading my soul. She admitted she used to imagine they were young or scared. She liked to think they were still out there, searching every face in every crowd for the toddler they'd lost. And now? I asked. My voice was barely a whisper over the sound of the crickets. She reached over and patted my scarred hand. Her touch was steady, unafraid. Most people look at my hands like they're a crime scene. But Pauline? She just saw me. She told me that some questions don't have answers that bring peace. I had to build my own peace from the ground up. I nodded like I understood. But that night, back at my apartment, I couldn't stop staring at the rippled skin of my palms. They were the only physical proof that I had a history. The catering gig felt like a fluke. A staffing agency called with a one-night offer, a private event at a lakeside estate, $50 an hour plus tips. I did the math. One night of carrying trays meant 3 months of study guides. I didn't ask questions. I just saw the dollar signs and signed up. Looking back, I wonder if there was some invisible thread pulling me toward that gate. Or maybe that's just the story I tell myself to make the randomness feel less terrifying. On the second Saturday of October, I ironed my white shirt until the creases were sharp. I polished my black shoes in my cold kitchen, my heart doing a weird, nervous flutter I couldn't explain. I drove 2 hours north. I watched the city lights fade into the dark, wealthy woods of the lakeshore. I had no idea that the man behind those iron gates had spent nearly 3 decades staring at my face in a private investigator's folder. I was just a guy looking for a paycheck, driving straight into the arms of a ghost. The Ashby estate looked like something from a movie. I pulled onto a private road lined with oak trees, so old they formed a massive canopy, completely blocking out the sky. It felt like I was driving through a tunnel into another dimension, one where the grass was groomed with scissors and the air smelled like money. When the trees finally opened up, I saw it, a mountain of limestone and old-world ego. I followed the service signs to a circular driveway where valets were collecting keys from guests, driving cars that cost more than my entire life's earnings. I felt the sudden, frantic urge to check my mirrors, just to make sure I wasn't leaving a trail of oil on their pristine gravel. I parked the Civic in the staff area, tucked away where the rich people wouldn't have to acknowledge it. I sat there for a long minute, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. This was not my world. These were not my people. They were the titans. And I was just the guy hired to keep their champagne cold. The catering manager, Donna, was a high-strung professional. She spoke in rapid-fire instructions and barely made eye contact. She handed me a heavy black apron and pointed me toward the auxiliary kitchen. Her voice was sharp, no warmth. "Do not speak to the guests," she told me, "unless spoken to. And even then, keep it brief, polite, robotic. Mr. Ashby values discretion above all else. You are part of the background tonight." I understood perfectly. Being part of the background was my specialty. For the first 2 hours, everything went smoothly. The rhythm of the work kept my anxiety at bay. I stationed myself at a large industrial sink, scrubbing a seemingly infinite mountain of champagne flutes. The noise from the main hall was a low, rhythmic hum, polished laughter, the melodic clinking of crystal. I caught snatches of conversations about stock portfolios, European summer homes, things I'd never understand. I just focused on the soap suds and the heat of the water. I kept my head down. Around 9 o'clock, the atmosphere shifted. Donna appeared at my shoulder, looking frantic. They were short-staffed. I dried my hands, grabbed a silver tray of empty flutes, and stepped through the double doors into the lion's den. The room was cavernous, vaulted ceilings, oil paintings with cold painted eyes. Guests clustered in exclusive groups, dressed in fabrics that moved like liquid. I kept my eyes fixed on the floor, moving like a shadow, trying to take up as little space as possible. Then, I saw the vase. It sat on a marble pedestal, pale blue ceramic, intricate gold detailing. Even from a distance, I could tell it was ancient, obscenely expensive, the kind of thing that lives behind bulletproof glass. I gave it a wide berth. I intended to loop around, but the universe had other plans. A guest, some guy in a tuxedo that cost more than my Honda, stepped backward without looking. His elbow caught my forearm. Hard. The tray tilted dangerously. I tried to correct the balance. I pivoted my weight, but my hip connected solidly with the marble pedestal. Time did that weird, sickening, slow-motion stretch. I watched the blue vase wobble. Its base lifted off the marble. I reached for it with my free hand, my fingers straining. But the tray was already sliding. My fingertips just barely grazed the smooth, cold ceramic, right as it tipped past the point of no return. The crash was spectacular, a violent explosion of sound that cut through the chatter like a thunderclap. Crystal flutes shattered into a million glittering diamonds. The $12,000 vase hit the floor and disintegrated. Silence washed over the room instantly, thick, suffocating. Every single person turned to stare at the guy who had just ruined the night. I stood frozen in the wreckage. The smell of spilled vintage champagne rose from the floor like an insult. $12,000. That was the number Donna had burned into my brain. I didn't have $12,000. I barely had $2,000 in savings, and that was my ticket out of the warehouse. Donna was already there. Her face was a mask of pale horror. She started apologizing to the guests, her voice high and trembling. I opened my mouth to offer some kind of apology, a promise to pay it back, but my throat was full of dry sand. Then, a voice cut through the murmurs. Calm, impossibly steady. Everyone, please. It's only porcelain. Continue enjoying the evening. The crowd parted, and I saw him. Theron Ashby. He was tall. Silver hair that looked like spun metal. A charcoal suit that fit him with a precision that made everyone else look like they were playing dress-up. He walked toward me, measured, confident steps. No anger, only a strange, detached amusement. "Are you hurt?" he asked. His voice was low, cultured. I shook my head. My hands were still hovering in the air. "No, sir. I'm so sorry. I'll pay for it. I don't know how, but I'll cover every cent." I was rambling, shaking, waiting for the security guards to grab me. But he wasn't looking at the broken porcelain anymore. He wasn't even looking at my face. His eyes had dropped to my hands. They were still extended in front of me, the harsh chandelier light catching every ridge and ripple of my scar tissue. The calm drained out of his expression so fast, it was like someone had pulled a plug. His lips parted. He turned as white as the marble beneath us. "Those scars?" he whispered. His voice cracked. "Where did you get them?" The question was so unexpected. I actually looked up and met his eyes. "I've had them my whole life," I stammered. "Since I was a baby, I don't really know how it happened." Theron Ashby stared at me for a long, agonizing moment. His breathing became shallow, ragged. Then he reached out and grabbed my arm. Not with violence, but with the desperate, trembling grip of a man drowning. "Come with me," he said. "It wasn't a request. Right now, there's something I need to show you." Every survival instinct I had was screaming at me to bolt for the service exit. I didn't know this man. I'd just liquidated $12,000 of his property, but there was something in his eyes, something that acted like a deadbolt. It was a brand of desperation so raw. It made my own chest feel hollow. Okay, I managed to choke out. We turned our backs on the wreckage. Donna's face was a mask of pure horror as we passed, but Theron didn't even blink. We moved down a long corridor. The muffled roar of the party faded into a surreal silence. Out of the shadows, a man in a dark suit fell into step beside us. Late 50s. Face carved from granite. He didn't ask a single question. "This is Boyd Cranston," Theron said. "He's been with me for 30 years. He knows everything." We stopped in front of a set of massive, heavy wooden doors. Theron pushed them open, and the scent of old leather and expensive tobacco hit me instantly. It was a private study, a room where people make move-the-market phone calls. But my eyes didn't stay on the bookshelves. They were pulled to the far wall. It was a literal shrine of photographs. Dozens, maybe hundreds of them. A younger Theron smiled back from the frames. And in almost every shot, he was standing next to a woman with stunning auburn hair. She was beautiful, and in her arms, a baby. "My wife," Theron said. His voice was straining. "Vivian and my son, Callum." I moved closer. My heart was hammering a frantic rhythm. I stared at the infant, searching for a spark of recognition. But the kid was just a generic baby. Round cheeks, tiny fists. I tried to see myself in that face, and I just couldn't. I was a guy who worked a loading dock, not a prince in a gilded frame. "What happened to them?" I asked. Theron went silent. He stared at the auburn-haired woman. "There was a fire," he finally whispered. "Our home in Pennsylvania. I was away on business. Vivian and Callum were alone. By the time the trucks arrived, there was nothing left but ash. They found Vivian's remains in the wreckage. The silence became suffocating. Only the pop of a log in the fireplace broke it. But Callum's body was never recovered," he continued. "The investigators told me the fire burned too hot. They said a small child wouldn't have left anything behind. I buried an empty casket, and I spent years trying to convince my heart to accept that my son was gone. Pennsylvania, a fire, a toddler around 2 years old. The details hit me like physical blows. The room felt like it was spinning. "But you didn't accept it," I said. "No." Theron turned to me with a sudden, fierce intensity. "I spent 15 years and more money than I can count hiring investigators. And 2 years into that search, we found a lead." Boyd stepped forward and handed Theron a thick manila folder. Theron pulled out a document, yellowed with age. "A child matching Callum's description was left at a fire station in Clearfield County," he read. 60 miles from the ruins of my house. No name, no ID, just severe burns on both hands." My mouth went dry. Theron reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a small, creased photograph. I took it with fingers that wouldn't stop shaking. It was a medical photo. An infant's hands wrapped in thick white gauze. "This was taken at the hospital right after the fire," Theron whispered. "The doctors said he'd grabbed a piece of burning debris while trying to reach his mother. The scarring would be permanent, distinctive, a fingerprint made of pain." He stepped closer. He gently turned my palms upward, exposing the rippled white tissue to the light. The pattern was a perfect, haunting match. The way the skin bunched at the thumb, the deep crater near the base of the palm. It was all there. "I watched you get those scars," Theron said. His voice finally broke into a sob. "I wasn't there that night, but I have seen them in my nightmares. Every single night for 27 years. I stood there, trying to reconcile the image of a billionaire titan with the broken human being vibrating in front of me. I felt a hot, heavy tear slide down my cheek. "If I'm your son," I asked, "why was I abandoned? Why didn't anyone come looking for me?" Theron exchanged a sharp glance with Boyd, a silent communication built on decades of trust. Boyd gave a single solemn nod, walked toward a locked cabinet, and retrieved a weathered leather folder. 2 years ago, we finally got our hands on records that had been under a legal seal, Boyd explained. Hospital intake documents. It took Theron years of legal petitions to get a judge to sign off on the release. He handed the folder to Theron. I felt my heart hammering a frantic, uneven thumping. Theron opened the folder with agonizing slowness. On top was a medical intake form. October 1997. But it was the sheet of paper clipped to the back that made the air vanish from the room. It was a single, ragged page. The handwriting was shaky, uneven. Theron held it out. "Read it," he whispered. I took the paper. The ink was faded, a ghostly blue, but the words were sharp enough to draw blood. "His name is Callum. His father is Theron Ashby. Theron doesn't know what I've done. Please protect my son. Tell no one. If Theron finds out the truth, he will destroy himself. I set the fire. I couldn't escape what I became. But Callum can. Let him be someone new. Let him be free. V." I read it 3 times. The words wouldn't fit together. "V," I breathed. "Vivian? Your wife?" "Yes." "She set the fire," Theron said. He closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were swimming in tears. "Vivian struggled after you were born. Postpartum depression. That's what they called it back then. But it morphed into something much darker. Something I was too blind to see." He took a shaky breath. "She refused treatment. She pushed me away, and I was traveling constantly, building the company. I never once imagined she could have done it on purpose." Boyd spoke up from the shadows. "Based on the timeline, Mrs. Ashby started the fire in the kitchen. Then, she experienced a brief moment of absolute clarity. She grabbed you, drove like a madwoman to that fire station 60 miles away. She left you there with that note, drove a mile down the road, and she never came back." I felt a wave of nausea. The room started to tilt. My mother had tried to kill us both. Then, she saved me. Then she died alone on a dark road, while I waited for a stranger to find me. "Why didn't you put out a public search?" I asked. My voice was rising. Why wasn't my face on every news channel? Theron's voice was barely audible. "Because I was told my son was dead. The investigators told me there was no body because the fire burned too hot. I was broken. I believed them. I buried an empty casket, and I spent 27 years mourning a boy I thought was Ash. I am so sorry. I am so sorry." He stepped forward and took my scarred hands in his own. His grip was firm, steady, but incredibly gentle. "I need to know for certain," he whispered. "Every cell in my body tells me you're my son, but we need proof that no one can ever question. Will you take a DNA test? Will you let me prove that I'm finally done searching?" I looked at him. This billionaire, this stranger, the man who might be the answer to every why I'd ever asked the universe. "Yes," I said. My voice was finally steady. "I'll take the test. Anyway." Theron warned me. He said even if the results were positive, there were people in his company who would do anything to make sure the rightful heir never stayed found. I didn't believe him. I thought he was just being paranoid. I thought that. Until 3 days later, I saw a black SUV with tinted windows idling outside my apartment at 3 a.m. Its headlights were cutting through the Ohio fog, like searchlights. I was sitting on the edge of my sagging mattress. The air smelled like stale cereal and the lingering chill of a radiator that couldn't quite keep up. I sat there staring at my phone. The laboratory had promised results within 72 hours. When the notification finally pinged, I didn't move. I couldn't. I stared at the sender's name for almost an hour. My thumb was hovering over the glass while my brain ran through 1,000 what-if scenarios. What if it was a mistake? What if I had to go back to being a ghost? Finally, I clicked. The PDF loaded with agonizing slowness. And there it was, buried under medical jargon. A 99.9 to 8% paternity match. Declan Morse was actually Callum Theron Ashby. I wasn't nobody. I had never been nobody. I sat in that cold, quiet room, and I wept until my throat was raw. Honestly. The weeks following the confirmation didn't turn into some overnight montage of private jets. Life is stubbornly ordinary. I still woke up in that same apartment, I still climbed into my beat-up Civic. I still showed up to the loading dock, moving heavy sofas while my coworkers argued about the Browns. But something deep inside my ribcage had shifted. That hollow space in my chest wasn't aching anymore. It was being filled with a concept I'd never allowed myself to touch: belonging. Theron and I decided to take things slow. You don't just parent trap your way into a relationship after 27 years of static. We couldn't pick up where we left off, because there was no where. Our first real conversation happened at a greasy spoon diner, neutral ground. Theron ordered a black coffee and just watched the steam rise. He never actually took a sip. I ordered a mountain of pancakes I knew I wouldn't eat, mostly because I needed something to do with my hands. "I don't expect you to call me Dad," Theron said. His voice was low. "I just want the chance to know you, however long it takes." He told me about the board meetings he'd skipped to sit in this diner. He talked about how his legal team was already dealing with the unfortunate interest my existence had caused among the Ashby relatives. He looked at me with a vulnerability that made the whole thing feel real. "I don't know how to do this either," he confessed. "I've spent nearly 3 decades being a father to a ghost. Just sitting across from you, watching you breathe, is more than I ever thought I'd get back." Anyway, I eventually drove down to Zanesville to tell Pauline everything. We sat on her porch swing. The wood was creaking in a familiar rhythm. I explained the party, the vase, the DNA results. Pauline gripped a glass of iced tea like it was a life raft. When I finished, she was crying, but not the kind of tears that needed comforting. "I always knew you were meant for something, Declan," she whispered. "I never knew what the universe was cooking up, but I knew you weren't just a stray. Now, I finally understand. You were just taking the long way home." I hugged her for a long time. She'd given me a home when the rest of the world was content to let me be a statistic. Finding Theron didn't change that. I finished my HVAC certification 3 months later. Not because I needed the money. Theron had already made it clear I'd never want for anything. But I needed to finish what I started. I needed to know that the man who loaded trucks at 5 in the morning could still stand on his own 2 feet. Theron actually showed up for the graduation. He sat in the back row of a cramped auditorium surrounded by blue-collar families. He wore a simple jacket instead of a suit. And when they called my name, he clapped louder than anyone in the room. Afterward, he shook my hand, a real, firm handshake, and he said, "I'm proud of you." Those 4 words, they broke open a part of my heart I didn't even know was still closed. I still think about Vivian, my mother, the woman who brought me into the world, tried to burn it down, and then gave her last moments to save me. I don't know how to feel about her. She was sick. She made an unforgivable choice. Then she followed it with a miraculous one. Both things are true. The scars on my hands, I don't hide them anymore. They used to be my greatest shame, a mark of abandonment, a question I couldn't answer. Now, I see them as a map. They're the reason a father recognized his son across a crowded room, 27 years after the world gave up on him. They are proof that I survived the fire. My name is Declan Morse, but it's also Callum Ashby. For 27 years, I thought I was a mistake. I thought I came from a void. I was wrong about every bit of it. If you're reading this and you feel invisible, like your past is a locked door, I need you to hear me. Your story isn't over. The answers you're hunting for might be looking for you, too. And sometimes, the scars you carry aren't just damage. They're proof that you survived long enough to find the truth. Don't give up. Keep going. Your turning point might be one broken vase away. So, thank you for listening, and thank you for reminding me that none of us are ever truly alone.